Devonte Price was 38 years old, and to everyone who knew him, he was exactly what he appeared to be. A quiet engineer in a rotation of 3 Blazers, driving a 4-year-old Camry, packing his own lunch, living a life that his wife's family had privately called a disappointment for 9 years straight. Her father never shook his hand like he meant it. Her brother never bothered to hide the contempt. And Adrienne, the woman he had loved faithfully for nearly a decade, walked into their backyard one Saturday morning, set an envelope on the patio table beside him, and told him she was done settling. She called him small. She said a real man was waiting. She laughed. What Adrienne didn't know, what none of the Caldwells knew, was that the quiet man they'd spent 9 years dismissing was the silent majority owner of their $80 million family company. And he had been patient long enough. Before we dive in, comment where you're watching from today. And if stories like this speak to you, hit subscribe, because tomorrow's story is even more intense. The alarm didn't wake Devonte Price. He was already awake. He lay still for a moment in the dark, listening to the quiet of the house. The ceiling fan clicked on every 3rd rotation, something he'd been meaning to fix for 2 months. Adrienne's breathing was slow, and even beside him. He eased out of bed without disturbing her, the way he'd learned to do years ago, back when he thought the care of not waking her was something she noticed. She hadn't noticed in a long time. The kitchen was cold and blue in the pre-dawn light. He started the coffee maker first, then moved to the small desk in the corner of the spare room, the one Adrienne called the junk room, the one nobody visited. He sat down, reached under the desk, and opened the laptop that lived in a fireproof sleeve between the wall and the filing cabinet. The screen asked for a password. He typed it without looking. What loaded wasn't the kind of thing that belonged in a junk room. Dashboards, clean, precise, color-coded in a way that suggested years of custom configuration. Wire confirmation, a liquidity summary for a holding company registered in Delaware with a name that sounded like nothing. Harlow Capital Group, LLC. A quarterly report for a freight and logistics operation that, if you pulled its parent structure far enough back through 3 layers of registered entities, eventually connected to a single name, Devonte Price. He reviewed the dashboards the way a man reads the weather, not with excitement, just attention. He cross-referenced 2-line items, made a note on a yellow legal pad in handwriting too small to read at a distance, then closed the laptop and slid it back into its sleeve. By the time the coffee was done, he was in the kitchen, dressed in a pressed button-down and khaki trousers, pouring 2 cups even though the second one would go cold before Adrienne came downstairs. He left for work at 7:15 in a 4-year-old Camry that needed new wiper blades. He drove the same route every morning, parked in the same spot, and walked into the offices of Meridian Engineering Consultants, carrying a lunch he'd packed himself, and a laptop bag that held exactly what it looked like it held. Inside, he was known as reliable, thorough, quiet. The kind of man who stayed past 5 when a project needed him, didn't ask for recognition, and never made anyone in the room feel challenged. His supervisor called him an asset. The newer analysts barely knew his name. Nobody at Meridian knew about the laptop in the junk room. That was the point. Dinner was grilled chicken and rice, made by Devonte because there'd been no discussion of who was cooking, and he'd learned not to wait. Adrienne came downstairs at 7, already dressed down from whatever her day had been, her hair loose. She smelled different. Not bad, just different. The perfume she'd worn for the first 6 years of their marriage was warm, something amber-based he'd bought her for a birthday. This was sharper, newer, something he didn't recognize. She sat at the table without looking at the food and picked up her phone. The second one, the one with the rose gold case she'd had for maybe 4 months now. She laughed at something on the screen, a short bright sound that cut off the moment she seemed to remember she wasn't alone. She set it face down on the table. "Smells good," she said. without looking at the plate. "Thanks," Devante said. He sat across from her. They ate. Adrienne glanced at the face-down phone twice in the first 5 minutes. When he asked about her day, genuinely, simply, she gave him 4 words and reached for her water glass. When he mentioned that the fence in the backyard still needed work on the south side, she said, and looked at the middle distance between them. He did not push. He never pushed. He watched, the way he always watched. The changed perfume. The second phone. The passcode she'd updated 2 months ago without mentioning it. He'd noticed when she unlocked it at breakfast one morning, and the muscle memory in her thumb took a different path. Small things, quiet things. The kind of things a man who had trained himself to observe could collect without ever being seen collecting. He filed them all away. Neat, ordered, and untouched, like documents in a sleeve. That night, after Adrienne had gone to bed, he called Nadia from the back porch. "The Caldwell documents," he said when she picked up. "Where are we on the review?" "Complete," Nadia said. "Ready when you are." "Not yet." He looked at the yard. The south fence leaned slightly in the dark. But soon. He went to bed at 10. Adrienne's breathing was steady again. He lay on his side of the mattress and closed his eyes and thought about nothing in particular, the way a man can when he has already made his peace with something and is simply waiting for the right moment to act on it. On Friday morning, Adrienne told him she was spending the weekend at her parents' house. "Of course," Devante said. He stood at the front window and watched her car, a silver Mercedes he'd helped finance 4 years ago, back out of the driveway and disappear around the corner. The street went quiet. The house went quiet. He walked to the junk room, sat down, and opened the laptop. The shareholder summary was already on the screen from his last session. He hadn't closed it. Caldwell Logistics, ownership, summary majority, shareholder, Harlow Capital Group, LLC, 51% beneficial owner of record, Devante Price. The fence wasn't going to fix itself. Devante was out back by 8 in the morning, the toolbox open on the ground beside him, a fresh 2x4 laid across the sawhorses he'd dragged from the garage. The October air was cool and thin, the kind of Saturday that made yard work feel like something close to peace. He measured the board twice, marked it with a pencil, and started cutting. He didn't hear the back door open. He heard it close. He looked up. Adrienne was crossing the yard toward him, dressed, fully dressed, not in the loose clothes she wore when she was staying home. Her bag was on her shoulder. Her heels on the grass were deliberate, like she'd thought about the walk before taking it. Her face was composed in the way that takes practice. She stopped at the patio table. She reached into her bag, pulled out a manila envelope, and set it on the table beside his coffee cup. She didn't say anything at first. She just looked at him. He straightened slowly, set down the saw. "What's this?" he asked, even though he already knew. Something about the envelope, the weight of it, the careful way she'd placed it, told him before he touched it. Adrienne folded her hands in front of her. "I filed for divorce," she said. "On Thursday." He picked up the envelope. She kept talking. He listened to her the way he listened to everything, still, without interruption, letting the words come and land where they were going to land. She said she'd been thinking about it for a long time. She said she married him when she was younger, and less certain of what she deserved, and that she had spent 9 years slowly understanding the full cost of that mistake. She said his name, Troy, with a steadiness that told Devante she'd said it in her own head many times before she said it out loud to him. She said Troy knew how to move through the world, knew how to provide, knew what a woman like her was supposed to have around her. She said Devante had always been. She paused here, and in that pause he could see her choosing the sharpest word available, limited, that she had told herself the quiet was depth, that she had convinced herself the plainness was just modesty. and that something larger was underneath it, waiting to rise. That she had waited 9 years for a man who never became more than exactly what she first saw. "I thought you might grow into something," she said. "You didn't." She didn't raise her voice. She didn't cry. She delivered it the way you deliver a verdict, cleanly, without apology, like the decision had already been filed somewhere official long before this conversation. Devante opened the envelope. He read every page. She stayed where she was, watching him. He could feel her watching. He turned each page with the same pace he'd turn a quarterly report. His face did not change. His hands did not shake. He read the asset disclosures, the settlement terms, the signature blocks at the bottom of the last page where her name was already signed in blue ink. When he finished, he tapped the pages back into order and looked up at her. "Is this final?" he asked. "Yes. Have you told your father?" Something crossed her face. Not guilt, exactly. More like satisfaction at a question that gave her an easy answer. "He's known for 2 weeks," she said. "He's glad, Devante. They all are. My whole family." She picked up her bag from the table. "It's done." He nodded once. He set the papers down on the table. Then he turned back to the fence. He heard her heels on the patio behind him. 3 steps, then the back door, then nothing. He picked up the saw. He finished the cut he'd started. He measured the next section, marked it, and kept working. He worked for 2 more hours. He called Nadia at 6 from the back porch, the same spot he always called her from. The yard was dark now. The new section of fence was in. "She filed," he said. There was a brief pause. "Devante!" "It's fine." He said it without heaviness. He meant it. "It's time to move on the Caldwell situation. I've waited long enough." Nadia went quiet for a beat. Not the silence of someone with nothing to say, the silence of someone who understood the full weight of what was now in motion. "You sure?" she said. "Pull the board documents," Devante said. "Schedule the call. And get me everything on Troy Ashford." He hung up. He went inside, washed his hands at the kitchen sink, and looked at the patio table through the back window for a moment. The manila envelope was still there. He'd leave it. The lawyers could sort out what belonged to who. He went to bed at 9:30. The lobby of Nadia Okafor's law office sat on the 14th floor of a glass building in Midtown Atlanta. It was the kind of office that made people sit up straighter just by existing. Dark wood, clean lines, a receptionist who greeted you like she already knew why you were there and had already decided whether you belonged. Devante walked in at 8:47 a.m., carrying a single manila folder. He was wearing the gray blazer, the middle one in the rotation, plain slacks, clean shoes, nothing notable. He looked like a man who had a 9 a.m. appointment and intended to keep it. Nobody looked up twice. That was fine. That had always been fine. Nadia's office had floor-to-ceiling windows that looked out over the city. She was already at her desk when he came in, 2 coffee cups on the table between them, a legal pad open beside a stack of folders that had not been there on Friday. She'd been working. She stood, shook his hand. Not a hug, not with that look in her eye that said, "I'm sorry about your marriage." Just a handshake, clean and level, the way it always was between them. She sat down. He sat down. He put his folder on the table. "Start with what you found," he said. Nadia pulled the top folder from her stack and opened it. She turned it so he could see the first page, a shareholder's summary he already knew by heart. But she walked through it anyway, because that was how they worked. Nothing assumed. Everything on the table. 12 years ago, she said, you purchased a freight brokerage operation out of receivership. Southeast Cargo Partners. 41 employees, 3 terminals, and a debt load that had everyone else running the other direction. She tapped the page. You bought it through Meridian Freight Solutions, LLC, which is registered in Delaware, with no public-facing ownership record pointing to your name. Devante nodded. He remembered the closing. He'd been 26 years old, sitting in a conference room not unlike this one, signing papers for a company most people thought was already dead. Over the next 8 years, Nadia continued, Meridian acquired 2 more regional brokerages, consolidated operations, and built out an infrastructure that made it genuinely valuable to a larger operation looking for a logistics backbone in the Southeast. She flipped to the next page. Caldwell Logistics was that larger operation. Or rather, Caldwell Logistics needed to be saved by a larger operation. 7 years ago, when Prescott over-leveraged the company on a failed expansion into Tennessee, the company was 6 months from defaulting on its primary credit line. She set a second document beside the first. It was a capital infusion agreement. The receiving party was Caldwell Logistics. The contributing party was a parent holding company, listed only as DPH Group. DPH Group stepped in, Nadia said, cleared the debt, provided operational capital, took 51% majority ownership in exchange. She looked at him. Prescott Caldwell has been running his own company as a minority shareholder for 6 years. He owns 34%. He has no idea who owns the rest. She let that sit for a moment. He has no idea, she said again, quieter, that the man his daughter just called Limited has been the majority owner of his life's work since before Adrian's 31st birthday. Devante picked up the capital infusion agreement and looked at it. He'd looked at it many times before. It didn't look different today, but something about holding it in this particular week gave it a different kind of weight. He kept the company alive, Devante said, not bragging, just stating a fact the way an engineer states a fact. I kept it alive. He just kept running it. And you let him, Nadia said, because that was the point. It had been the point. He had never needed Prescott to know. He had never needed Adrian to know. He had built the whole structure deliberately at a distance from his personal life because he'd learned early, from watching his mother work 2 jobs to keep them fed, that money changes what people see when they look at you. He had wanted to understand what Adrian saw when there was nothing to see but him. Now he understood. Nadia closed the first folder and opened the second. Here's the part that's new, she said. Her voice shifted slightly. Not softer, but more precise. I've been going through the divorce filing your wife submitted. And Devante, she slid the folder across the table. Her attorneys didn't write this. He looked at the first page, then the second. The filing was aggressive in a very specific way. It included asset claims against 2 of his LLCs, not DPH Group, but 2 smaller entities that were technically traceable to his name if you knew exactly what you were looking for and exactly where to look. Someone had looked. Troy Ashford has a $14 million real estate development deal in Buckhead, Nadia said. Mixed-use project. He's been pitching it for 2 years. The deal only closes if he has an anchor tenant with the size and financial standing to make the property bankable. She set a printed email chain on top of the folder. Sourced from a public business filing, she noted, nothing improper. The anchor tenant he's been promising his investors is Caldwell Logistics. Devante read the email chain, slowly, once. Troy doesn't just need Adrian, Nadia said. He needs the Caldwell name. He needs the company liquid and fully operational. And he needs you out of the picture before anyone starts asking questions about who actually controls the majority share. She tapped the divorce filing. I believe his attorneys drafted this to find and freeze your assets before the development deal closes, neutralize you financially, make sure you can't interfere. The room was quiet. Outside the window, 14 floors down, Atlanta moved through its Monday morning without knowing anything. Devante set the email chain down. He straightened the papers in front of him. Then he folded his hands on the table and looked at Nadia. File a standard counter, he said. No aggression, no alarm. Dispute the asset claims on procedural grounds and request the standard disclosures. Nadia picked up her pen. And the tone? Cooperative, Devante said. Tired even, like a man who just wants the whole thing to be over. He looked at her steadily. Let them feel comfortable. I want them confident before everything changes. Nadia wrote it down. She didn't smile. But her pen moved with a certain kind of purpose. The last box wasn't heavy. That was the thing Adrienne noticed as she carried it to her car. 9 years in that house, and the last of what she was taking fit into a single cardboard box. A few books, a picture frame, a candle she liked. She set it in the trunk of her Mercedes, closed the hatch, and stood for a moment in the driveway. The house looked the same as it always had. Clean, quiet, well kept. She got in the car and drove north toward Buckhead without looking in the rearview mirror. The Caldwell house was lit up when she arrived, every window warm. Her mother's car in the driveway alongside Weston's Range Rover and Troy's silver Audi, which sat closest to the door like it already belonged there. Adrienne walked in to the smell of good food and the sound of her brother's laugh coming from the dining room. Prescott Caldwell stood at the head of the table, a glass of Burgundy in his hand, already mid-sentence about something. He was a tall man with silver at his temples, and the particular posture of someone who had never once doubted he was the most important person in any room he entered. He looked up when Adrienne walked in, and his face did what it always did when he saw her. It opened, just slightly, in a way it didn't for most people. "There she is," he said. He crossed the room and kissed her forehead. She let herself be held for a moment. Troy stood near the fireplace, jacket off, shirt sleeves rolled to the elbow, holding a glass of bourbon and looking like a man who had already calculated exactly how comfortable to appear. He smiled when he saw her. It was a good smile. It always had been. "Hey, you," he said. "Hey," she said back, and let him pull her in. Dinner was set by the time they all sat down. Eleanor Caldwell had made the kind of meal that only happened when something was being celebrated. The good china, the good candles, the silver her mother otherwise kept wrapped in cloth in the sideboard. Prescott waited until the food was served, and then lifted his glass. "To my daughter," he said, to the end of a chapter that should have been shorter. He looked at Adrienne with steady, satisfied eyes. "And to what comes next?" Glasses lifted around the table. Weston drank first and set his glass down with a sound that was almost a punctuation mark. He was 40 years old and built like a man who had played football in college and had never quite stopped performing for a crowd that was no longer there. "I'll be honest," he said. "I feel like we've been holding our breath for 9 years. He cut into his food without looking up. "Devante was never the right fit. Nice enough, maybe. But there's a difference between nice and capable. And that man was always a placeholder." He shrugged. "Some people belong at the table. Some people just sit at it." Nobody disagreed. Troy tilted his head, the way he did when he wanted to seem thoughtful instead of pleased. "I'll stay out of that," he said. "Not my story to tell." He smiled at Adrienne. "Only thing I'll say is, that chapter's done now, and I like what's ahead." Prescott nodded at Troy, with the specific nod of a man who has decided something without announcing it. He'd been watching Troy for weeks, with the careful attention of someone evaluating a potential hire or a potential heir. The Buckhead development pitch hadn't hurt anything. 42 residential units, ground floor retail, a logistics hub component that could absorb a long-term anchor tenant with real operational scale. He'd listened to the full pitch twice. Weston had been nearly vibrating in his seat both times. "The Buckhead project," Prescott said, settling back in his chair. "You had some updated numbers?" Troy nodded, easy and unhurried. "I'll bring the revised deck next week. But the fundamentals haven't changed. The deal works if the anchor tenant has the footprint to make the logistics component bankable." He looked at Prescott directly. "Caldwell is the right size, the right geography, the right reputation." He let a beat pass. "It would be good for both sides. It would be very good for both sides, Weston said. What none of them said, because none of them knew, was that a co-investment of that scale required majority shareholder approval, and majority shareholder approval for Caldwell Logistics ran through a holding company called DPH Group, registered in Delaware, with a principal officer whose name did not appear anywhere on the Caldwell family's radar. The candles burned low. The good dishes were cleared. 40 minutes south, in the house that still held the shape of everything that used to be in it, Devontae's phone lit up on the kitchen counter. A message from Nadia. Found the business records from Troy's development partner in that civil filing I told you about. You need to see the timeline. Caldwell Logistics' anchor strategy is discussed explicitly, dated 3 months before Troy ever met Adrian. He didn't stumble into a business opportunity. He built a relationship to get to one. Devontae read it once, then again. He set the phone face down on the counter. He stood there in the quiet kitchen for a long moment, his hands flat on the cold granite, looking at nothing. Then he picked the phone back up. Confirm the quarterly board meeting date, he typed, and send me the co-investment threshold clause from the shareholder agreement. He opened his laptop, and he began drafting a document he did not send yet. The report arrived on a Tuesday, not digitally. Physically, a plain manila envelope, hand-delivered by a courier, Devontae had used 3 times before through his business dealings. No return address, no logo, just his name printed on the front in clean block letters. He set it on the kitchen table and poured a cup of coffee before he opened it. The table felt bigger than it used to. The whole kitchen did. Adrienne's things were gone. The decorative bowl she kept by the window, the row of cookbooks she never opened, the small framed print above the coffee station that said something about mornings in a font she'd liked. The walls still held the faint outlines of where those things had been. Lighter patches, ghost shapes. He sat down and opened the envelope. The investigator's report was 41 pages, tabbed, organized by date and category the way Devontae had requested, chronological, sourced, annotated. He read every page. Troy Ashford, 41 years old. Real estate developer operating primarily in Metro Atlanta and Charlotte. 2 prior serious relationships, both with women whose families had significant business holdings. The first, a woman named Carla Benton, daughter of a commercial construction family in Charlotte. Troy dated her for 11 months. Her family's company was positioned as a co-investor in a mixed-use development Troy was pitching. The deal fell apart during due diligence. The relationship ended 4 weeks later. No engagement. No overlap with another woman, as far as the investigator could confirm. Just a clean exit. The second, a woman named Simone Duval, whose family operated a regional restaurant group with 32 locations across Georgia and Tennessee. Troy dated her for 8 months. He pitched a development project that needed the restaurant group as an anchor tenant. Financing fell through on Troy's side. He walked away from both the deal and Simone within 6 weeks of the collapse. 2 times. Same architecture, different names. The third time was Adrienne. The communication records came from a civil filing, a breach of contract suit between Troy and a former development partner named Marcus Webb. The suit itself was 2 years old. It had been settled quietly. But the exhibits attached to the original complaint had never been sealed. Devontae turned to the tabbed section and read. The emails were businesslike, clinical. Troy and Marcus Webb discussing pipeline projects, capital strategies, the particular challenge of securing anchor tenants for large mixed-use developments without a balance sheet strong enough to carry the full project independently. Then, a message from Troy to Marcus, dated 14 months before the divorce papers landed on Devontae's patio table. Caldwell Logistics is the right size for the Buckhead anchor. Regional footprint, strong revenue, family-owned so decision-making is concentrated. Need to find the access point. Looking into the family structure now. A follow-up, 2 weeks later. Daughter is the move. She runs in the right circles. Event at the Piedmont Club next month. I'll be there. 3 months after that, Adrian came home smelling like a different perfume. Devante set the report down. He picked up his coffee cup and held it without drinking. Outside the kitchen window, a neighbor's dog was barking at something down the street. 2 sharp sounds, then nothing. A car passed, then quiet again. He thought about the early years. He thought about the apartment they'd shared before this house, smaller and louder, with a radiator that knocked in the winter and a view of a parking structure that Adrian had insisted on decorating around. Hanging curtains so deliberately chosen that the parking structure eventually stopped mattering. He thought about a Sunday morning in that apartment. Eggs on the stove, her laughing at something on the radio, barefoot on the tile. He thought about the version of her that had existed in those years, the one who had chosen him over everything her family expected. He had loved that version genuinely and completely, without calculation, without reservation. He did not know exactly when she had decided he wasn't enough. He did not know whether the decision had been slow or sudden. He suspected it had been slow. A gradual erosion, worn down by her family's disapproval, by years of Prescott's polite condescension and Weston's open contempt, by a world that kept measuring men in ways Devante refused to perform. He knew that grief. He'd been carrying it longer than he'd admitted to himself. He sat with it now. He didn't rush past it or argue with it or convert it into something more useful. He just let it be what it was. 9 years of real effort, real care, real love on his side of the marriage, slowly becoming a thing that Adrian had needed to survive, rather than wanted to keep. It was heavy. He let it be heavy. He sat there for a long time. Then he stood up. He washed his coffee cup. He put the report back in the envelope. He carried it to his office, set it in the locked drawer with the other documents, and came back to the kitchen. He picked up his phone and made 3 calls. The audience heard none of them. When he was done, he sat down at the kitchen table with his laptop and opened a new email to Nadia. 1 line, "We're moving to the next phase. Set the meeting with the Caldwells for Thursday." He pressed send. He closed the laptop. He turned off the kitchen light. Nadia filed the counter-response at 8:47 a.m. Devante was at his desk at the consulting firm when she sent him the confirmation. He read the 2-line message, set his phone face down, and went back to the project schematics on his screen. Nothing in his face changed. The man in the next cubicle was complaining about traffic. Someone's printer was jammed. The office smelled like burnt coffee and carpet cleaner. An ordinary Tuesday. The counter-response was not ordinary. 43 pages. Every asset claim Adrian's attorneys had listed, contested, every valuation, challenged, every LLC referenced in the original filing, answered with a request for the documentation trail that had led anyone to surface it in the first place, and attached to all of it, a formal request for complete financial disclosure from both parties, including all communications between Adrian Price and Troy Ashford regarding any shared business interests, investment discussions, or financial arrangements, past or present. Nadia had written it the way she wrote everything that mattered. Clean, precise. No extra words. Just wait. Troy's attorneys called her office at 2:15 that same afternoon. The man on the phone introduced himself as a senior associate at a firm Devante had never heard of and would never need to remember. He used phrases like mutual efficiency and streamlined resolution. He suggested that both parties might benefit from simplifying the proceedings, that certain document requests could perhaps be narrowed in scope, that the discovery phase didn't need to become adversarial. Nadia listened. Then she said, "We're comfortable with the current scope. Please direct any further questions to my office in writing." She hung up before he finished his next sentence. Weston Caldwell called on Thursday morning. Devante was in his car, parked outside the consulting firm, eating the sandwich he'd packed. He looked at the name on the screen for one full ring. Then he answered. "Devante!" Weston's voice carried the particular confidence of a man who had never once been told he was wrong by anyone who mattered to him. "We need to talk. I'm listening. Look, I'm going to be straight with you, because I think that's the respectful thing to do." A pause that wasn't really a pause, just Weston organizing his condescension into something that sounded like generosity. "This divorce is happening. You know that. Adrienne is done, the family is done, and dragging this out isn't going to change the outcome. All you're doing right now is running up legal fees and making yourself look bitter." Devante took a bite of his sandwich. He chewed. He swallowed. "The family is prepared to offer you a settlement," Weston continued. "Structured buyout of the joint accounts, fair market division of the property. It's more than fair, honestly. More than most men in your position would see." Another pause. "We're giving you a clean exit, Devante. Take it. Sign the papers, take the money, and move on with your life. Nobody needs this to get ugly." Weston said your position the way someone sets a plate in front of a dog. Devante looked through the windshield at the parking lot. A woman was loading groceries into an SUV 2 rows over. A kid on a bicycle cut through the far end of the lot, standing up on his pedals like he was riding through something important. "Thursday," Devante said. "Your family's attorney's office. What time works?" A beat. Weston clearly hadn't expected agreement. At least, not this fast. 2 o'clock, he said, and the satisfaction in his voice was immediate. "I'll let them know. I'll be there." "Good." Weston's tone shifted into something almost magnanimous. "This is the right call, Devante. Seriously." Devante said nothing to that. He ended the call. He finished his sandwich. He drove back into the parking garage, took the elevator up, and spent the rest of the afternoon reviewing load-bearing specifications for a client who manufactured industrial shelving. That evening, he sat across from Nadia at her office. The city was dark outside the window behind her. Her desk was clear except for 2 folders and a yellow legal pad covered in her handwriting. Small, precise letters that moved in perfectly straight lines without a ruled page beneath them. "Board members?" Devante asked. Both confirmed. Nadia didn't look up from the legal pad. "Henderson and Park. They've reviewed the notice and the agenda. They'll vote. Friday morning is still clear?" "Filed and locked." She turned a page. "Troy's banking contact at Meridian, the one who's been holding the development financing pending the anchor confirmation, he's going to receive a courtesy copy of the board resolution the moment it passes." Devante nodded. "And the document packets for Thursday?" Nadia lifted one of the 2 folders and set it in front of him. He opened it. 6 tabbed sections. Clean. Organized. Everything sourced. Everything annotated. Everything irrefutable. He turned to the last tab. Read the final page slowly, the way he read things he'd already read 100 times, not because he'd forgotten, but because the words deserved the attention. Then Nadia set the second folder down on the desk. She opened it to the top document and slid it toward him. The emergency board session notice. Formal. Signed. His signature at the bottom. Next to the date. Friday. 9 a.m. Devante picked it up. He read it once, start to finish. And then, for the first time in longer than he could name, something moved at the corner of his mouth. Quiet. Small. There and then gone. But it was there. The bourbon was a 2009 reserve. Prescott Caldwell set the bottle on the dining room table like he was placing a trophy, turning the label forward so everyone could see it. "Special occasion," he said. Nobody argued with that. The Caldwell house in Buckhead sat at the end of a long driveway lined with magnolia trees. Inside, every room was the kind of clean that required a housekeeper. The dining room had crown molding and a chandelier that cost more than most people's cars. The table sat 12. Tonight, there were 6. Prescott, Eleanor, Weston, Adrian, Troy, and the warm amber light of a family that believed it had just corrected a long mistake. Weston poured without being asked. He filled Troy's glass first. "Tomorrow's a formality," Weston said, dropping back into his chair. "Sign the papers. Write the check. Done." Devante takes his settlement and goes back to whatever it is he does. He waved his hand vaguely. Engineering, spreadsheets, whatever. Troy smiled. It was an easy smile. Comfortable. The kind of smile that came from a man who had already moved the furniture around in a room and was just waiting for everyone else to notice. 30 days after the ink dries, Troy said, looking at Adrienne, the development financing closes. I've already had preliminary conversations with the team. They're ready to move. He reached over and covered her hand with his. Everything we talked about. It's right there. Adrienne looked at him. Her face was open in a way it hadn't been in years. 30 days, she said. 30 days. Prescott raised his glass from the head of the table. He had the posture of a man delivering a verdict he'd been sitting on for 9 years. To getting things right, he said. Crystal touched crystal around the table. The sound rang out clean and sharp in the big room. Dinner was roasted lamb and conversation that kept looping back to the development deal. Weston had a rendering on his phone. A mixed-use building in Buckhead, glass and steel. The Caldwell name attached as a principal logistics partner. He passed the phone to Prescott, who studied it with the focused approval of a man who had spent his whole life learning to recognize what success was supposed to look like. The anchor arrangement gives us visibility in a market we haven't had a presence in, Prescott said. He set the phone down but kept looking at it. That's not just a real estate play. That's a statement. It's a legacy move, Troy agreed. He knew exactly what word to use. He had always known what word to use. Weston leaned back in his chair and swirled his bourbon. We should have been doing deals like this 5 years ago. I've been saying that. We get too comfortable moving freight and forget we can be building something. Prescott nodded slowly. The way he looked at Troy across the table, it was the look of a man deciding, again, that he'd made the right call. Eleanor had been quiet through most of dinner. She laughed at the right moments. She refilled water glasses. She made sure the bread basket got passed. But she ate slowly, and there was something careful behind her eyes that the rest of the table was too loud to notice. When Adrienne got up to bring the dessert plates from the kitchen, Eleanor followed. The kitchen was all white marble and warm pendant lighting. The sounds from the dining room came through faint and easy. Weston's laugh, the clink of Prescott's glass. Eleanor picked up the stack of plates and then set them back down. Adrienne? Adrienne turned from the counter. Eleanor stopped. Started again, quieter. I always thought Devante was a good man. I want you to know that. I think we were too quick to dismiss him. Your father, Weston. She paused. All of us, really. I don't think we were fair to him. Adrienne looked at her mother for a moment. Then she smiled. The warm, easy smile of a woman who had already made her decision and wasn't looking to revisit it. Mom. She picked up 2 of the plates. It just wasn't right. That's all. Nobody did anything wrong. Eleanor looked at her daughter. She didn't push. She had spent a long time learning which things she could say and which things would only get said to the kitchen wall. Of course, she said. She picked up the remaining plates and followed Adrienne back to the table. Across town, the house was quiet. Devante sat at his kitchen table. In front of him was a single folder, the Caldwell Logistics shareholder summary. He opened it. He read it the way he always read it, slowly, every line. Not because he needed to, because the document deserved that, because he had earned every word on every page. He closed the folder. He washed his coffee cup, dried it, and set it back in the cabinet. He checked the door lock, turned off the kitchen light, walked down the hall. At 9:30 p.m., Devante Price got into bed. He closed his eyes. He slept. The Caldwell family attorney's conference room was on the 14th floor of a building in Midtown. Floor-to-ceiling windows, a long table with leather chairs, a credenza along the wall with a silver coffee service that nobody had touched. It was the kind of room designed to make one side feel powerful. It had worked before. It would not work today. Prescott sat at the center of the table, his jacket pressed, his posture straight. He had the look of a man attending to something unpleasant but necessary. The way you look when you take a car in for a repair, you've already decided is overpriced. Weston sat to his left, one arm draped over the back of his chair, already impatient. He had checked his watch twice before the meeting started. Adrienne sat beside her attorney at the near end of the table. She wore a cream blazer. Her hands were folded. She looked composed in the way of someone who had practiced being composed. Devante sat across from them with Nadia beside him. He wore the gray blazer, the one he rotated through. He had his hands flat on the table, and his face told the room nothing at all. The Caldwell family attorney, a trim man named Briggs with silver hair and the measured confidence of someone paid to project it, opened the proceedings by sliding a document packet across the table toward Nadia. "Our terms are straightforward," Briggs said. "Structured buyout of marital assets based on current appraised values, standard 50-50 division of joint accounts, and a full waiver of future claims from Mr. Price against any member of the Caldwell family or associated business interests." He folded his hands. "We believe this represents a fair and complete resolution." Weston leaned forward slightly. "More than fair." He said it the way he said most things, like he was doing someone a favor by saying it at all. "There's a real number on that sheet, Devante, not a token. We're being more than reasonable here." Devante did not look at the sheet. He looked at Weston for exactly 1 second. Then he looked at the window. Nadia picked up the packet. She read through it at her own pace. Nobody rushed her. Nobody tried. When she finished, she set it down, aligned it neatly with the edge of the table, and looked up at Briggs. "We're declining these terms," she said. Her voice was even, unbothered, like she was commenting on the weather in a city she didn't live in. "Before any settlement framework can be finalized, my client has several disclosures that the parties need to review." Briggs blinked. "Disclosures?" "That's right." Weston's jaw tightened. He looked at Devante. "What kind of disclosures could you possibly—" Nadia opened her briefcase. She did not look at Weston. She removed a stack of document packets, each one bound with a binder clip, each one identical, and she placed one in front of Prescott, one in front of Weston, one in front of Adrienne, and one in front of Briggs. She kept one for herself and set one in front of Devante, who did not open it. "Take your time," she said. The first page was the Caldwell Logistics Shareholder Registry. Clean. Official. The kind of document that had been filed, stamped, and stored in a county records office. Prescott looked at it, and his expression didn't change yet. Because what he was seeing was familiar. His name. His percentage. The company he had built. The next pages were different. They showed a series of LLC entities. 6 of them, each one linked to the next through annotated lines and footnotes. Nadia's documentation was precise and patient. Each connection was explained in plain language. Each ownership chain was traced one step at a time, all the way to a single parent holding company. Prescott turned to the final page. At the top, in clean black type, was the name of the parent company. Below it, one line, Registered Principal Officer, Devante A. Price. The room went still. Not quiet. Still. The difference was important. Quiet was what happened when people stopped talking. Still was what happened when people stopped breathing. Prescott read the page again. His eyes moved slowly from the top to the bottom. Then he turned back to the page before it. Then back to the final sheet. He read it a third time. His hand was flat on the document, and his face was doing something that no one at that table had ever seen Prescott Caldwell's face do before. Weston's expression moved in stages. His brow pulled together first. Confusion, the kind that came from reading words that refused to arrange themselves correctly. Then his eyes moved to Devante, then back to the page. Then something shifted behind his eyes, and his face went hard and dark and ugly. Adrienne had gone the color of the document she was holding. She didn't move. Devante watched Prescott. He waited. He had been waiting a long time. A little longer cost him nothing. Prescott set the paper down. He looked up. Devante met his eyes across the table and said, in a voice that was calm and even and final, "I've owned 51% of your company for 6 years." Prescott's mouth opened. Nothing came out. No one in the room spoke. Devante folded his hands on the table. He waited. The silence lasted long enough to become its own kind of answer. Then Prescott broke it. "How?" He said it the way a man says something when he already knows the sentence isn't complete, but can't find the rest of the words. He cleared his throat. Tried again. "How is this possible?" His voice was controlled, careful. But underneath the control was something strained and thin, the voice of a man pressing his full weight onto a floor that was no longer there. Devante looked at him. 7 years ago, he said, Caldwell Logistics was 30 days from insolvency. Prescott's jaw tightened. Your receivables line had collapsed. Your primary carrier contract had been pulled. You had a payroll obligation you couldn't meet, and a credit facility that your bank was about to close. Devante's voice stayed flat and even, the way an engineer reads a report. Not cold, exactly, just precise. You needed a capital infusion and a restructured operating agreement within 60 days, or the company was done. "We found a partner," Prescott said. The words were careful, measured. "You found me," Devante said. The room said nothing. "My holding company made the acquisition through a blind intermediary, full majority stake. You received the capital, the company survived, and the operational structure stayed intact." He paused. "I didn't change anything. I didn't pull rank. I didn't touch the management structure or interfere with a single business decision. For 6 years, I held the controlling interest in Caldwell Logistics and ran it exactly the way a silent partner runs a company he believes in." He looked at Prescott steadily. "I was protecting something I thought had a future." Weston leaned forward. His voice came out tight and hot. "You were sitting at our table, at our house, at Adrienne's—" "Weston!" Devante said the name once without raising his voice, and something in the delivery made Weston stop. Just stop. The way you stop when the temperature in a room drops 3 degrees all at once. Devante looked back at Prescott. "I kept the stake separate from my personal life because I needed to understand who Adrienne was without the weight of money changing everything between us. Wealth changes how people see you. It changes what they're willing to become. I wanted to know who she was when she thought I had nothing remarkable to offer." He let that land. "Now I know." Adrienne made a sound that wasn't quite a word. Devante did not look at her yet. Nadia reached into her briefcase and removed a second packet. She did not distribute this one to the room. She crossed to Prescott's end of the table and placed it directly in front of him. Deliberately. Father to father-in-law. One man to another. "This one is about Troy Ashford," Nadia said. She returned to her seat. Prescott looked down at the packet. He opened it slowly. The first page contained the timeline. Clean columns. Dates on the left, documented activity on the right. Nadia's annotations were brief and exact. 3 months before Troy Ashford attended the charity event where he met Adrienne, his business communications, surfaced through a related civil filing, showed his team actively researching Caldwell Logistics as an anchor tenant target for the Buckhead development. Specific references to the company's freight volume, its financial profile, its family ownership structure. Specific references to Prescott by name. The second page showed the development deal itself, the numbers, the structure. The way Caldwell Logistics, as anchor tenant and co-investor, was the load-bearing wall of the entire project, without which no bank would touch it. The third page showed the prior relationship. Two of them. Two other women from moneyed families. Two joint ventures that fell apart. Prescott read, without speaking. His hand was flat on the table and his face had gone somewhere private and shut. A man doing the math on something he did not want to add up. Adrian's voice came from the far end of the table. Was any of it real? She said it quietly, almost to herself. Her hands were still folded, but they were pressing against each other now, the knuckles pale. Does he actually… She stopped, started again. Was any of what Troy said real? Devante looked at her. That's a question for Troy, he said. His voice carried no anger in it, no satisfaction either. It was simply the truth, stated plainly, by a man for whom that question had moved entirely outside his territory. That is no longer my concern. Adrian looked down at the table. Devante turned to Prescott. You'll have your full answer about the company's future tomorrow morning. I've called an emergency board session as majority shareholder. 9 a.m. He picked up his folder. You'll want your attorney present. Nadia was already closing her briefcase. They both stood at the same moment, the way two people move when they have been working together long enough that they don't need to signal it. Nadia collected the remaining copies. Devante buttoned his jacket. Thank you for your time, Nadia said to Briggs. Professional. Final. They walked to the door. Devante opened it. The hallway was quiet. The elevator bank was 20 feet away, and there, seated in the lobby's upholstered chairs with one ankle crossed over his knee and his phone in his hand, was Troy Ashford. Troy looked up when he heard the door. He started to stand. His mouth opened. Devante walked past him without a word, without a glance, without any acknowledgement at all, the way you walk past a piece of furniture in a room you are leaving for the last time. Nadia followed. The elevator doors opened. They stepped inside. The conference room on the 14th floor of the Midtown office building had floor-to-ceiling windows that faced east. By 9 a.m., the morning light was coming in flat and sharp, laying itself across the long table in clean white strips. Devante arrived first. Not in the rotation blazer, not in the Camry. He wore a dark charcoal suit he had owned for 3 years and never had occasion to use. He carried a leather portfolio that had his initials pressed into the bottom corner. He sat at the head of the table, the majority shareholder's seat, and set the portfolio down and opened it and did not look at his phone. The two independent board members arrived together and greeted him by name. Not the way people greet someone they are meeting for the first time. The way people greet someone they have known quietly and at a careful distance for years, and who they have always suspected was more than he appeared. Prescott arrived at 8:58. He sat down without speaking. He looked older than he had yesterday. Not dramatically, just the way a man looks when he has not slept and has spent the hours since learning something about himself that he cannot unknow. Weston came in last. His tie was slightly off. His jaw was set. He looked at Devante once when he sat down, the way a man looks at something he has decided to be angry at, and then he looked at the table. Nadia sat to Devante's left. She had a yellow legal pad, a pen, and the expression of someone who had been ready for this room for a very long time. The meeting opened at 9 o'clock exactly. 3 motions, clean and sequential, no speeches. The first dissolved the pending co-investment agreement between Caldwell Logistics and Troy Ashford's development company, effective immediately. Devante read the motion in full. Both independent board members voted yes. Prescott abstained. Weston voted no. It passed. Nadia slid a prepared letter across the table. Formal notification to Troy's primary banking contacts that the Caldwell anchor tenant arrangement had been withdrawn and that the company had no present or future interest in the Buckhead development project. One of the board members signed it as co-witness. The letter would go out before noon. Troy's deal was dead. Whatever he had told his investors, his lenders, or himself about the future, all of it was dead. The second motion installed an independent interim COO to conduct a full operational audit of Caldwell Logistics. 60 to 90 days, complete access. All accounts, all contracts, all management decisions made in the last 4 years. Weston pushed back from the table slightly when Devante read it aloud. "That is not necessary," he said. His voice was tight. "This company has been running fine. The audit will confirm that," Devante said. "Or it won't." He looked at Weston without expression. "Either way, we'll know." The motion passed the same way as the first. Weston voted no. It didn't matter. Weston sat very still after that, his hands flat on the table, staring at something in the middle distance that wasn't in the room. The third motion was the last. Devante announced his intent to sell his 51% majority stake in Caldwell Logistics to Meridian Freight Partners, a competing logistics firm that had been pursuing acquisition of the company for 3 years, and whose standing offer was already documented and on file. The sale, once completed, would be executed at market rate. Prescott's 34% would remain his. But the company he built, the company that bore his name on its letterhead and its trucks and its contracts, would belong to a competitor. The Caldwell name, Devante said, would come down on whatever timeline Meridian chose. Prescott looked up. For the first time in the meeting, he looked directly at Devante. Not with fury, not with the patrician contempt he had carried through 9 years of Sunday dinners and holiday handshakes. Just directly, the way a man looks at someone when the version of events he has been living in has been replaced all at once by the real one. "You held this company," Prescott said. His voice was measured, careful, for 6 years. "I held it with good faith," Devante said. "I protected it because I believed in what it was, because it mattered to people I thought mattered to me." He paused. "That faith no longer exists." Prescott said nothing. The motion passed. The house was quiet when Adrienne arrived. She used her key, the last time she would. She moved through the front room with her eyes down, going directly to the corner of the hallway where Devante had stacked the remaining box of her things. Careful, organized, labeled in his handwriting. She stopped when she saw him in the kitchen doorway. "I wasn't sure you'd be here," she said. "I knew you were coming," he said. She looked at the box, then back at him. She was not dressed the way she had been on the patio that Saturday morning, put together, composed, rehearsed. She was in regular clothes. Her hair was pulled back, simply. She looked like herself, the version of herself that didn't have an audience. "Why didn't you tell me?" she said. Not accusatory, genuinely asking. "Tell you what?" "About the money. About who you actually were." Devante leaned against the doorframe. He considered the question the way he considered everything, without rushing it. "I showed you who I was for 9 years," he said. "Every day. The way I handled things, the way I treated you, the way I showed up." He looked at her, steady and even. "You decided it wasn't enough. You made that decision before Troy, before any of this. The money was never the point." He paused. "You didn't leave me because I had nothing. You left because you stopped seeing me, and that happened long before you had any reason to look somewhere else." Adrienne opened her mouth and closed it again. There was nothing that answered that. They both knew it. Devante crossed the room and picked up the box and set it by the front door. 1 week later, Eleanor Caldwell called. It was a Tuesday evening. Devante was eating dinner alone, reading a report on the Memphis manufacturing operation he'd been watching for 4 months. He answered on the second ring. "Devante," she said. Her voice was careful and warm, and a little worn. "I know I have no right to call. I won't keep you long." "It's all right, Eleanor." She was quiet for a moment. "I want you to know. Not for the family. Not on anyone's behalf. Just for myself." Another pause. I should have pushed back. When they talked about you the way they did, all those years, I knew better. I knew you were a good man, and I said it quietly in my own head, and I never once said it where it counted. Her voice held. I'm sorry for that. I'm sorry I didn't. Devante set his fork down. I hear you, he said. That's all I wanted to say. Thank you, Eleanor. They didn't speak again, but the call mattered. It settled into the record of things that had happened between the Prices and the Caldwells, and it was the only entry in that record that carried any grace. 18 months later, the sale of Caldwell Logistics closed at $82 million. Devante's 51% yielded just under $42 million after taxes and transaction costs. He wired a portion of it into existing investment accounts, allocated another portion to the Memphis acquisition, and did nothing dramatic with the rest. He bought a small house, by choice. It had a porch that faced east, a yard the right size for one person to maintain, and a kitchen with enough counter space to cook a proper meal. He woke at 5 a.m. He packed his own lunch. He had dinner with Nadia and her husband on Fridays, and those evenings were easy in the way that only very old trust can make things easy. The Caldwell Logistics name came down 8 months after the acquisition closed. Meridian replaced it with their own branding, and the trucks that had said Caldwell on their doors for 20 years were repainted over a single weekend. Prescott still owned his 34% of a company that was no longer his in any way that mattered. He ran a small consulting practice now. The work was occasional. The office was modest. Weston's audit ran 63 days and found what audits find when no one has been watching carefully. He negotiated his exit under legal pressure, quietly, with a non-disclosure agreement and a settlement that was less than he expected and more than he deserved. Troy Ashford's Buckhead development deal collapsed inside of 60 days. His banking relationships, 3 of them, the ones that had been built on the expectation of the Caldwell anchor tenant, declined to extend credit for new projects, while a prior civil fraud complaint worked its way back through the relevant channels. Nadia had ensured, in the course of her investigation, that the right people knew the complaint existed. That was all it took. Troy's business required trust, and trust, once withdrawn, does not return on request. Adrienne was living on the east side of Atlanta, in a 1-bedroom apartment that she paid for herself, doing a job that had nothing to do with the Caldwell name. People who knew her said she was quieter now, more careful. Whether that was loss or something else, the story didn't say. On a Tuesday morning in late October, Devante stood on his porch with a cup of coffee and watched the sky go from dark to pale to the particular blue that only happens in the first 20 minutes of a Georgia morning. The street was empty. The neighborhood was still. The only sound was a bird somewhere in the oak tree at the edge of the yard, doing what birds do before the world wakes up. He stood there for a long time. For 9 years, the silence in whatever house he occupied had belonged to something, to the waiting, to the watching, to the careful management of everything he knew and hadn't said. Silence had been a tool, a discipline, a container for everything he was that no one around him could see. Now it was just silence, his porch, his morning. He lifted the cup and drank his coffee and watched the light come up, and for the first time in 9 years, the silence felt entirely like his. Thank you for watching until the end. If this story meant something to you, hit subscribe and turn on notifications. I've got 2 stories on the screen that you have to watch next. Have a great day!